You are about to enjoy a production of the Ella Wellness Network. This is Wellness Fixes the Pod. I'm your host, Dr. Kelsey Vig, and I'm so happy you're here. Welcome to the Wellness Sisterhood. We have another special guest on Wellness Fixes the Pod today, and someone who has been very influential in my life. I definitely wouldn't be as passionate about this field or in the position I am today without her and her guidance. She is also someone who constantly inspires me with how she approaches her own health, wellness, and work balance. So she's a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine. She's a professor of 37 years at one of the top kinesiology and health education departments at UT Austin. She has her master's in exercise science and her PhD in advertising and health communications. With that, Dr. Dixie Stanforth, welcome to Wellness Fixes the Pod.
Thank you so much.
Let's talk about your deeper why behind your own health and wellness, like your own routines, but then also your education efforts within this like health and wellness space.
That is a broad question, yes. And because of my age, we could just stop right there and I'll just tell you my whole why. When I think about my why, I feel so fortunate, and I think you're in a similar boat, that I love to exercise. And for so many people, it isn't something that they love. I grew up, I had 4 brothers, I was a bit of a tomboy, I've always been physically active, and played sports as much as I could. Title IX came along while I was going through the educational process, and I'm very grateful for that because it opened opportunities that really weren't there for women for many, many years. And so when I think about my why, I just fell in love with movement and sport and physical activity, and in college changed my junior year from pre-law to was called physical education back then.
I didn't know that. Yeah, that's
yes,
pre-law. I didn't know that.
Pre-law. I was working in a law firm, and I realized everything I do that I love. I worked in the training room at William & Mary, which is where I did my undergraduate work. And I played sports, and everything I did in my spare time was physical activity based. And I realized I think people do this. Yeah. And I went back to school in my junior year, thank heavens for liberal arts educations, where you can make changes like that. And I took an anatomy class. And we got to dissect cadavers. And it was the hardest class I'd ever taken, but I loved every minute of it. And I haven't looked back since. Just the passion to learn as much as I can about the body, about movement. And then I think probably because of who I am, a little bit how I'm wired, helping other people come to love that as well.
Yeah, and I'm one of the recipients of that. I said this in Phil's episode, but I tell everyone, like, UT didn't choose, like, I didn't choose UT, UT chose me. And when you enter UT, it's like, you hear as a high schooler, like, you're just a number. And like coming into y'all's class the very first day, it was like, I'm where I'm meant to be. Like hearing you guys intro yourselves and then also say, you know, hey, we have a weekly Bible study y'all are invited to, and Thanksgiving, it was in August, and Thanksgiving, y'all are welcome to come, you know? And it was just those moments. I called my parents after. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not just a number here, you know? And it was just like this true like alignment where I was like, I'm meant to be here. And it's a huge part because of you guys and how y'all just, the amount of effort that you put into educating us, of course, to like reach our professional goals, but then also the effort you put into us as people and like making sure that we understood that y'all were there for us as students too. So I'm a huge recipient of that.
That is water to our souls,
yes,
certainly.
Yes.
And I don't know if your listeners are aware of this, but Kelsey was like, if we could clone Kelsey, she was the ideal student. She worked so hard and did so well and wanted to learn everything. So I would encourage you, as you're watching this podcast, following Kelsey's footsteps to be a lifelong learner.
I do think it's why I started this podcast too, like just the education component. I do love education. And as a physical therapist, that's a huge part of my job. But I like full body and fully educating and sort of, debunking things and realizing like, hey, this is actually how our bodies work. Like this might be the clickbaity terms and this might be what you're hearing, but I do love the education component too.
Yeah.
So,
and you're very good at it.
Well, thank you. Let's start off with some of the basics for your expertise. But what are some of the top ways exercise can help us, especially as women? And I say this like super broadly because we all know that exercise can help us, right? We know in general, we're like, okay, it helps our heart health, it helps our body composition, it helps our muscle mass, our bone mineral density, our brains, our mood, our nervous system. Like we know from a broad level, but from more of a physiological perspective, how does it actually help our heart health? How does it actually help our muscle health, our bone mineral density, our nervous system? Like what actually goes into exercise helping us physiologically?
Well,
let's combine all of our education down
into 2 sentences.
Yes.
Well, actually, the first thing that comes to my mind as you ask that question is the value of exercise. While physiologically it's very similar from person to person. So for example, as you mentioned, cardiovascular training, interval training, we're trying to train the energy systems of the body. And so you're going to see changes like an increase in VO2 max. You're going to be able to shift your lactate threshold so that you can train at higher levels of intensity for longer periods of time. But I think when we think about the overall value of exercise, it's actually the list that you went through. There are not many things in the world that affect every single system of our body physiologically. So we could pick any one of those systems and talk about at the cellular level, at the mitochondrial level, at the fiber level, if we're talking strength gains. How you train is going to lead to improvement. And what that improvement is going to look like depends on how you train. And so I cannot think of a system of the body that isn't positively impacted by exercise. But I would have to say that overall, the bigger impact is the ability to be confident in the fact that you can move and you can function and do everything that you want to be able to do in your life well. And I think that that's what drives which systems you target. Whether somebody's interested in hiking in the summers and you have to do a combo cardio strength focus for that person. There's somebody else who maybe doesn't care about hiking, but they're more interested in, because of maybe their family history, what their spine health is like. So I think that regardless of the system, you can develop a training program to improve it. What it looks like, what that improvement actually is described as, is going to depend on the program that you design.
Definitely goal-oriented. And we talked about this in Phil's episode too, but the idea, he was saying one of the biggest transitions for him throughout his involvement in health and wellness, the field in general, was the view of exercise as medicine, or that exercise can target all of these systems. There's not a medicine that you can get that it's positively affects all of these systems, right? It's like, okay, it might affect them, but which one, one might be more negative than the other. So I love that, looking at exercise as a way to target all of the systems. And it is goal dependent because, like you said, someone might have more of these endurance, longer term, longer racing goals, where someone else might want more of the strength and ability to lift heavy loads for light repetition, or for a decreased number of repetitions, and their training is going to look different.
And life is not steady state. Life is seasonal. And so you have to think about, where are you right now, not just age-wise, but where are you emotionally in this season of your life? So I trained a client earlier this week who has recently experienced a loss in his family. It's a granddaughter. And it was unexpected. And he was, as you would expect, devastated. And when I showed up to work with him, I saw him before they went to the funeral and after the funeral. And our goal was simply to get him out of the chair and get him moving, because of the positive hormonal benefits and the ability to impact those stress hormones. And we didn't do anything that was challenging. We just targeted getting him moving. And so that's where, I figured Phil had talked about exercise being the best medicine, no matter what you're talking about, for the most part. But I think looking holistically and recognizing that there are very few things that affect both the physical and the mental and the emotional/spiritual. There's just not many things out there, whether you're taking something or doing something. And so I think that if we could get people to buy into that, to understand that, if my client had recognized the importance of, he knew it in his head, but actually doing it, getting up and moving, he felt so much better by the end of our session. And we walked and we stretched a little bit, and we did some mobility exercises, and, kind of blended in there. And he looked different at the end of the session, and you could tell that he felt different as well.
Right. I think it's also true what you're saying about our ability to shift during different seasons, where it is like one of the components that we can address in our life that can shift, and we have control over that shift, whether our goals are the mental, emotional side of things, because maybe you are going through a loss, or where it's like, okay, I'm a new mom and I just do not have time. I can only get the mobility stuff in. Or if you're like, I actually do have this training goal, or I do have this injury where I'm like rehabbing from this too. Yeah. So I think it gives the power back to us, thinking of exercises like something that we have control over, and movement. I like to call it movement because I do feel like sometimes people look at exercise as that negative connotation, and not negative, but it's just a barrier where it's like, oh, I have to go do my workout, I have to go do my exercise. Where if I look at it as movement, it's a blessing, where it's like, okay, some people, like if you experience certain grief or you experience a certain injury, you might not have movement in the way that you used to have movement for a period of time. And so utilizing that as a way to help your body from so many perspectives, whether that is a training goal or even just like a emotional, psychological, like mental health goal too.
Which may actually be even more important, over time, to affect the physical.
Right.
Because we can't tease those systems apart. And that's where I think you see the cascading effects. It's easier to see kind of those hormonal cascades that happen, whether it's in a negative way or a positive way.
Right.
And so you can see that emotionally, and yet the way to get there is oftentimes simply being, I say this a lot because I got this advice when my mom died, to be kind to yourself, to figure out what would be helpful to your body right now during this season. And a lot of times you just have to give yourself permission to not be, I like the move away from work out, because that doesn't even sound like fun,
that's
right?
I never thought about that.
Work out.
Yes.
It's like, okay, what am I working out today? Yes. And yet, some people mentally, they're there, but I think a broader spectrum of people, the idea of movement, the idea of doing things that are benefiting and helping me, that's what we want to be targeting.
Right. And more of that top down, like it's like, okay, mental health, like it comes before the physical. It's like, if I approach a workout and I am in that like just poor headspace, it's not going to be that much more productive, So I think that's a great answer to that very broad question.
Okay.
So in alignment with that, I get the question a lot, like, how do I know what exercise is right for my body? And I think we touched on that a little bit. Again, it depends on your goals, but what are some ways that we know whether our bodies are positively responding to the loads and the exercise that we are choosing for our bodies? And then why might some people's bodies just respond differently to different types of exercise?
It's a great question. And I think what's challenging is in this world with so many social media influencers and the power of communicating that way, I think that comparison becomes a really, I look at comparison as a negative thing, not a positive thing.
Right.
And so what happens is people end up communicating, and this has gone on for centuries. This is not new, but it's simply the ability to communicate to such large numbers of people and to be able to both see and hear in a nanosecond, as opposed to going to the library and maybe getting a book that you heard about. Everybody has all of this information right at their fingertips. So the challenge, I think, from the perspective of your question is, I would have to say, I don't think there is one right exercise for anybody. And anyone says everybody should do this, whether we're talking movement or nutrition, pretty much anything. I mean, look at us. We're built differently. We're different heights. We're different body types. We have different preferences. What we enjoy doing is really different, perhaps, and we may have some overlap there. Mm-hmm. But it's really trying to find the things that light you up, that you enjoy doing, and then figuring out how to do those things that maybe move you towards some of your goals. But the challenge is a lot of times people are looking at that influencer and saying, well, if I do that, I'm going to look like this.
Yes.
When that is never going to happen. And so I think you start, the basis of that premise is a bit of a lie. Mm-hmm. It's just not true. Mm-hmm. It isn't going to happen. And so I think most of us, we pick things that we tend to be better at because we enjoy doing them more if we aren't terrible at them. Mm-hmm. And yet, looking for things that you enjoy and that you can grow into, I think is one way to potentially look at that.
Everyone's seeing all of these influencers and social media in general, and it's like, oh, her body style. When it comes to aesthetics, it's like, oh, she's doing this, so that's going to work for me. And that's not necessarily the case either. And I think another good point about it is experimentation. I think that's what I got a lot from you guys in college, just learning about this stuff. It's like, okay, this is how I can improve my VO2 max. Let me try this for a little bit. Let me try some of these things to do this. Oh, this is actually how I can improve some of my strength. Let me try this a little bit. And it gets you a little bit, like we were talking about in the nutrition segment, it's getting you might go on either side of the extremes, but it's helping to narrow that pathway to find what you are able to enjoy, what feels good for your body, and then what is getting you the closer to the results and the goals that you want to. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Well, and we always say you are your own experiment.
Yes.
And you have to be willing to run the experiment. And so trying new things, a lot of times you have no idea if you're going to be if you're going to be any good at it, if you're going to enjoy it, or if you maybe have some issues that it may not be a beneficial exercise for you. I love water, and I think I'm much bigger and taller than I am. Phil's constantly reminding me of that. And so I love the thought of rowing. And I've read so many books, whether they're fiction or true or Boys in the Boat.
Yes,
and I mean, and then we have Town Lake here in Austin, Lady Bird Lake. And I was convinced that if I got a rowing machine, I could learn how to erg and then I could row. But we got an erg and I began training and I signed up for an online program and I loved it. However, I've had a couple of bad accidents over the years. Herniated discs, cervical and lumbar, and some other damage that has happened. And what I realized was I had been managing all of that pretty well. And as much as I loved it, we had to sell the rowing machine because I needed to get it out of the house because it was not helping me. It was hurting me. And so I think being willing to experiment, you also have to be willing to take a no.
Know your limitations a little.
And it wasn't that I was overtraining. It was simply that the movement pattern was not being beneficial to me. And as hard as it was for me to say, I don't think I'm going to get to row, I had to be willing to say that. Now, the flip side would be someone who has, never done hiking or Pilates or something, yoga, and they try it and they love it, and they find out that their body is just made to do this, and they have a whole new movement slice that they can add into their life that will help them in the years to come. So you got to be ready for either answer, because not everything is beneficial for everybody. And, I know we've talked about in classes, hypermobile people, for example. Do they really need to be doing more movement training that opens them up further? Right. Should they be thinking along the lines of strengthening? So I think that would be in response to your question, really evaluating how am I built? what are my genetics? What is my structure like? What are things that would help me be able to do everything I want to do better? And then what are things that I really don't need to be doing because maybe that's not going to be of benefit to me.
Right. And going back to health, like even your health history as a physical being, what are you, you know, as much as I was a gymnast growing up, you know, and you wouldn't look at 5'8" me and know that, but you know, that might not be the sport that I'm built for anymore, you know, and just what your physical body and what you're good at. Because I could do gymnastics, and if I'm good at it, great. I'm going to stick with that too. So.
Yeah, but I bet you're not doing what you used to do in gymnastics anymore. So
oh my gosh, no. The chin-ups, the little Kelsey, I was just like, how in the world, the amount of push-ups that I used to do.
How much did you grow? When did you get your height?
I grew freshman year of high school.
Okay.
And you know what? Actually, it was sophomore year, but I got my period freshman year of high school, like pretty late, I'd say freshman. It might have been sophomore year, but the body fat percentage just wasn't there, you know? So it was like, it took me a while. And then after I got my period, that's when I shot up. So I was 5 foot in 8th grade and 9th grade. Yeah.
And probably stellar at
gymnastics
and then
and
things
cheer
shifted some. Yeah. Similar to me with the rowing machine.
Exactly.
No's are hard to hear, but sometimes you just have to be willing to hear it. And yet that doesn't mean that I'm just sitting around whining about I can't row, although I do whine occasionally about it because I would love to still.
Yes.
But, you know, you find other things that you can do and that you love and enjoy doing and that are of benefit to you.
And I think you'd echo this too, but variety is also nice. Like, I mean, one of the main things that you guys taught was the importance of not just doing things in like one plane of motion, you know, for strength training and all of that. It's like, we don't just do squats and lunges and all of these things. We do variations and different patternings. And I think the same thing can be applied to our exercise routines, where if you're doing the same exact thing over and over and over again, unless you're training for a goal or something like that, but variety is nice because your body can adapt to something and then, you know, redo some of those nerve pathways to improve in another area. So it's okay if you like to do strength training and Pilates training and yoga and hiking if your body's responding well to it. And it doesn't have to be this like formulaic thing that you're seeing your favorite Pilates instructor saying, I do 5 days of Pilates a week and I do 1 day of strength and 1 hiking. If you enjoy all these other things and your body tolerates all of them and responds well and you don't have the history like the rowing machine with the, so, you know,
there's that.
If there's all of these things that your body's responding positively to it, it's okay. Like I feel like the mindset helps too. Like if you're enjoying it, your body's probably like that top-down approach. It's like if you're enjoying that exercise, it's probably very hard to do studies on how much you're enjoying it versus the effects on your body and your physiological measures later on. But I'm sure that they're there, right? Where it's like, if you enjoy something, your body is going to actually respond more positively to that than forcing something maybe a little bit too much that you don't enjoy as much.
Yeah, I think that that's really true. And if you just think about in life, I mean, it would be, you know, you can train yourself to do something and be disciplined and hate it.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, there's people that feel that way about broccoli, if we're totally honest. So they eat it because, you know, that's, they know they should. And so I think that you can think about activity the exact same way. And there are some things, for example, I would say as we age, we have to look at, you know, changing some of our training a little bit as we move through those decades. And things maybe look a little bit different, and yet you can still keep doing what you enjoy doing, or being disciplined to do something like strength training for many women that they know is a benefit to bone density, not losing muscle mass with menopause, all of the positives, and yet they may not enjoy it. So I think you have to balance some of the things that you know you need, the broccoli, or the kale for some people, and the things that you love doing, and making sure that there's some alignment between those two as well.
Yeah, and a good balance too. I think Huberman Lab said something, it's probably been 2 months back, of the brain benefits of doing something consistently that you don't like to do over time. And the part of your brain that over time, like older individuals who have really good memory and really good ability to speak and conversate and reaction time, they have a larger of this area of the brain. And been shown to grow with doing things that you don't enjoy doing. So even if it's something I don't enjoy doing, I like to think of still the benefits I'm getting from that, from doing that hard thing that I don't really like doing. If it's a hill sprint workout one day that I'm just not feeling,
Exactly.
I'm like, but I know this is helping in multiple perspectives, not just my heart health, but also my brain health too.
Absolutely. It's a great point. And I think, maybe you hate the hill sprints, but you could do them on an elliptical, or you could do them some other way that maybe is more appealing to you.
Or with a friend.
Exactly.
Way more fun. Way more fun.
Always.
So you mentioned different things throughout the lifespan, like different, I guess, exercise shifts or focuses that we might have to have throughout different decades in our life. Let's talk through some of those. Like, what would you say are different pillars that we as women specifically should focus on throughout the lifespan at these different phases of our lives?
Yeah, it's a well-asked question. I think, when I consider, I've trained some of my clients for over 30 years, and so we have kind of grown a little bit older together. And this week I trained one client I've trained for 30 years and his daughter. And so, it's really interesting to try to blend those things, because what I was realizing in this session on Tuesday was it was really difficult to do that because they are in such different places. So where the younger individuals oftentimes are more interested in the aesthetics, they care more about what they look like, they aren't necessarily thinking of all of the health benefits. It's much more what they're able to do and how they look. As you get older, so many changes are happening that you don't have control over, that I do think, as you mentioned earlier, exercise gives you some measure of control over some of that, but you can't, it's inevitable. It's just part of the aging process. And so let's think about resistance training, for example, because you may remember a slide that appeared probably in every class that you took from me about who should strength train, and the answer is everybody needs to do some form of weight training in order to build or maintain muscle mass. Looking at bone density particularly, so you look at younger people, you're thinking about how can you build that bone density? And then as you're getting older, you're trying to hold on to what you have as that window of being able to lay down bone mass closes. And so training changes. And so if we were to compare the younger person with the older person with resistance training, time is a bigger issue often for younger people than for older people who maybe have a little more flexibility in their schedules. And what's kind of cool is that for the younger person, you are probably looking at, to maximize time, you're lifting heavier weights, fewer repetitions. You're able to pack more in to a smaller time frame, which can be the biggest barrier to whether or not somebody actually does an activity, is do they feel that they have the time, that capacity to commit time to these different forms of movement training. For the older individual, things have shifted, and so the joints maybe have more wear and tear, and they possibly aren't overall as strong, and yet they can hold on to muscle mass and quite a bit of strength, but you shift your programming towards potentially significantly lighter weights, but significantly more reps. So where if I were to ask you to do a workout with me and I'm asking you for 30 to 50 rep ranges, you're thinking, and we're going to get 4 exercises done, and that's all we're doing in our session. Where the older person, I'm looking for big rep ranges with them, but the weight is relatively light. Do you both get fatigued? Yes. Do you come close to failure? Yes. But how you get there is really different. And the benefits are failure's failure. Physiologically, failure is failure. But I'm not going to have this older person driving heavy weights and trying to see, let's see how many, if you can lift that 2 or 3 times. So you really just look at some of those changes that reflect, once again, not just one system, but the overall person and what they enjoy doing, but also what's happening with their body over time.
And that comes down to physical therapy stuff too.
It
where it's,
does.
Yes, a lot of the ways we treat younger individuals compared to older individuals, and even just different stages in life, like pregnant women compared to non-pregnant. It's like there's things we have to work around. And yes, I'm not going to have someone max shoulder pressing when they are 70 years old with a there's just some things that we have to modify and work around based on someone's like just musculoskeletal history and life.
Well, and I wonder too, because we've talked about kind of that mental component as well. I would think trying to get a 70-year-old to max out with an overhead press. So now I will say functional training. I do work with a lot of my older clients. We do suitcase carries and suitcase lifts because of overhead bins.
Yes.
And so we do some things that translate into real life. And those we aren't doing 50 times,
right.
But they're
helping everyone on the plane.
Exactly, like I'll get that for you. But it's really, you're looking for things for those individuals that they can see an immediate benefit to doing this. I'm not sure I'd be having that conversation with the 25-year-old thinking about, well, when's the last time that you had trouble lifting your suitcase into the overhead bin? They're thinking, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So it's really functional for the stage of life, the season of life as well. The pregnant woman, for example, thinking down the road, you've got your own built-in overload as that child grows and develops, and they're not a dumbbell. And so you have to start thinking about what are some ways to help that person strengthen posterior chain, be able to pick up well. You do press overhead with that little one sometimes. And so I think as long as you think about what do I want to be able to do well, then you start targeting being strong enough to do that from the ground up, and really thinking through what are the most safe and effective ways to do this for that person.
Like you said earlier, too, thinking of long-term goals and working back from there. It's like, okay, and long-term can be relative. It can be the 70-year-old where I'm thinking, what are my goals when I'm 70? What do I want to do when I'm 70? But it can also be long-term, meaning like, okay, how is this woman who's pregnant, who is about to deliver a baby, like how is she going to be able to maintain her strength, but with a more dynamic variety of movement, that she's having to do? And that can be long-term, even if that's not, decades down the road. So I like the thought of like, putting it a little into the future and then working back from there a little bit too.
And I think programming, not necessarily camping on why you're doing it. So for instance, jump training and some of the research about how that helps with bone density.
Right.
And for so many when you work with older individuals, you're talking about if they haven't been doing anything like that, they're hopping across a line on the floor. And that's where you're starting, where for the younger person, you're seeing people do box jumps that seem absolutely impossible for me to think about being able to jump up onto something like that. But they're landing perfectly and their form is great. The long-term benefits of, say, jump training are huge in terms of balance, stability, and bone density. The older person, you're focusing on balance and bone density, and the younger person, they just think it looks cool to be able to jump up onto that box.
Maybe,
It translates really well to tons of different sport activities, and it's also just a cool thing to be able to do.
Oh, yeah.
And yet, the long-term benefits are tremendous. So thinking about those things that have benefit through the lifespan and trying to integrate that whenever you can as well.
I think when I'm wondering your opinion on this too, thinking about language and language utilized with especially older individuals in jump training, right? Where I feel like if I told someone, I feel like you probably have to do a lot of education if you're starting that for a training program for the first time, saying, okay, we're going to do some jump training because this is going to help you in this way. When the patient or person is not necessarily used to that maybe, and they look at it as like, oh my gosh, jumping. I don't jump. I'm too old to jump. Why would I jump? I feel like there's a lot of education that you have to do probably on the benefits of that and getting over some of the hurdle of like, I should not be doing this because I am this old. I should not be jumping, you know? I get the same thing with deadlifts where I had one mentor, she tells me she calls them health lifts now because so many people are fearful of deadlifts, where she's like, well, if I just call them something, everyone bends down to the floor to pick something up. So let's call it something else. So I feel like there's probably a lot of language and work on changing mindsets surrounding some of these like scarier things for especially like older clients.
Yeah, and it feels risky for them in particular. And yet I do think some of the challenge with that is when the progression is too rapid or it's too hard and they can't do it. And so that's where I would contend, even, you saw this in art class, there were people, young, college-age people, who there were things that they were not able to do because they had never done hopping on.
Hop, skip.
They can't do they can't do a movement pattern at all because they've never done it, and they're 20.
Right.
And so I think recognizing, especially with older people, what is a reasonable place to start, and really talking about, helping them understand why we're doing it, and talking about hopping, skipping, as opposed to always jumping, because jump is a big word.
Scary, yeah.
And you think high jumping, and the pictures that people probably get in their brains when we say some of those things are frightening, actually, now that you bring that up. And so I think language really does matter. And knowing people, so recognizing if you have a grandmother or one of your viewers is trying to help an older family member, if they have any dance background, you start there with them, and you put the music on and just have them start moving around, and you might be surprised how much they could do in response to there being a little bit of music in the background. And so, I always say, music it bypasses our head, it goes right to our hearts. And so it's speaking a language that is different. And so I would say for many of these people, when you're teaching, we call them novel movement patterns, whether you're 20 or 80, novel movement patterns are hard, and that's a good thing. Learning novel movement patterns should be something we do through the lifespan, and then mastering those patterns, and then moving on to something else that is novel and trying to master that. And part of what happens with that is physiological. A big part of it is neurological. And I think you also break down that sense of, I can't do new things. I have a friend, Kelsey, former grad student. I think she was a little before your time, and she teaches at a school in California. And she's got a little 3-year-old now, and the last time I was in San Diego, we went to a park, and her little girl is running around. We're helping her climb up the climbing wall. She's 3, and she gets to the top, and she says, I can do hard things. And I'm thinking,
I would have cried.
I want to video this, and I want to play this at your wedding rehearsal dinner or whatever, because I just thought, she's learning this at age 3, and how beautiful is that? And yet Kelsey is so intentional and so committed to helping her child not be afraid of new things, not doing them perfectly. Think about a novel movement pattern. You're pretty, excuse the language, crappy we are when we're learning something new that we've never done before. And that we need to learn to be okay with that, and not just give up, and not just say, I'm really bad at this, and so I'm never going to do this again, but to say, I'm really bad at this. I think I need to practice this some. And how do we shift people that way? How do we shift people towards that, no matter what you're doing with them?
I do think that's why some of these like other alternative forms of movement outside of, the typical resistance training and running, I feel like those are maybe top 2, right? Where it's like, okay, maybe people, and I think we're getting over this, and girls are becoming better and better at understanding this. And I know there's so many programs out there teaching girls to strength train and weightlift and do some of these power-based movements. But I feel like for even my age, strength and conditioning programs at the youth level were not as common, where it was college where we're starting to figure out that some of these movements and how to do them. And so I feel like some of these, like, and I call them alternative, they're definitely forms of exercise, but like bar and Pilates, where it's like, okay, a little bit more approachable and you're learning this novel movement, but then, okay, maybe you get a little bit more confident with that and you're like, oh, I can actually squat. Let me actually try adding weight with this, or let me try this way. So I think, yeah, decreasing that barrier to entry in whatever way, whether it's with language or whether it's novel movements that are not too novel that it's like a barrier for yourself, but introducing, I guess, movement in that way with a kinder language, and like dance or like music, or with like movements that seem more approachable and seem more, girls like me are doing this, so I can do this too, or relationally even too.
The beauty of novel movement patterns is you don't expect to be good at something you've never done before. The challenge becomes, and I think that this is a real challenge for most people, is we call it a growth mindset, that willingness to fail at something, and that's okay, and that we use that failure to learn and to grow, to not just say, well, I'm really bad at this, so I guess I'm going to avoid it, and I'm not going to ever go near this again because I'm so bad at this. Instead of flipping that on its head and saying, I am really bad at this. I think I'm going to have to practice this. I was that way with yoga when I first did yoga, and I have a strong sport background, and I'm looking around the room thinking, oh my gosh, and I'm not real mobile, and I was strong and stable, but I was not mobile. And in that environment, strength and stability can actually not be your friend. But it was so good for me to just look around from the very first class and say, I guess I need to do more of this. And so I'm so grateful that I think being physically active through the lifespan helps to teach that, because you expect to be bad at something, and that's okay.
Right.
I'm not ever going to be a professional yogini. And so I give myself a break, and I want to get better at it, but I'm never going to be able to do some of those movement patterns.
The inversion.
And that's okay.
My example for that for me is CrossFit.
Okay.
So gymnasts kind of like a lot of post gymnasts, like retired gymnasts, they transfer into CrossFit. But some of the snatches and the like more power based movements, I did this form based class because a lot of my clients are CrossFit athletes, and so I needed to understand the movements myself so that I could like teach them. And I understand, form based things, and I can see someone's movement patterns and know for their body. I'm good at visualizing that, but putting myself in that situation, it was like ground zero. I was working from this like power clean or something where I was just like trying to coordinate all of these different dynamic movements and knowing about just like part to whole practice and like some of the motor development stuff and like the motor control, and the coaches were teaching in that way. And I was like, yes, this is how I'm going to learn it too, because they're teaching me in segments and then we're going to combine it. But it was just a way for me to like humble myself a little bit, because I feel like a lot of people think I'm a physical therapist. I demo things in the best form, in the right way. But if you put me out of my comfort zone, I'm also learning these novel movements.
Exactly.
And
triple extension is not easy.
No, especially quickly. And I was like, I was a bar and beam specialist in gymnastics. Floor, vault, power-based, no, not my thing. And so I saw that transfer over to some of the CrossFit-based stuff where a lot of the coaches were like, Kelsey, quicker, snap, quicker. Snap. You trust me, I'm trying.
This is it. You got it.
I'm maxing this right here.
You got it.
Like you can time me.
I think there's also some unanticipated benefits. So when I took up yoga, I did hot because I like to sweat. And so that was awesome. But what I did not anticipate from a new activity was the translation to other activities that I was doing. And the biggest gain for me from yoga to, I was doing a lot of cycling then, and a lot of other, mainly cycling and hill training for cardiovascular stuff. And I realized after doing yoga for a while that I had learned to breathe when things got hard. And so the beauty for me of yoga was not that I became super flexible, because that did not happen. But I was doing, Austin, and it's very hilly, and we were out in a particular place called Lime Creek, and it's got these three this one long hill that has three parts to it. And I remember we were doing repeats on it, and I realized how much better I was able to use my understanding of holding a pose in yoga. You're not holding anything when you're cycling up a hill, but I was able to translate how to breathe during that really hard activity. So I think that when you're open to new things, they actually can make things that you might already be okay at better in ways that you don't even expect or anticipate.
That's awesome. I know. I'm trying to think, what did I get out of CrossFit besides just humility? Humility is always good too.
Yes, humility is a wonderful trait that we can all hope for. More humility in our lives.
The need for power, for speed, for quick reaction. I was like, this is going to help, my battle. It was more of I had to switch the mindset. Like, maybe I'm not going to be the quickest at that snap, at that triple extension, but still, I'll get some other benefits from it.
You will, and I bet if you let yourself think about it, not in this moment, but I bet you'll see some other benefits.
Carry through, totally.
Yes.
Switching topics a little bit, behavior change and consistency with movement and exercise and workouts and nutrition and just like health and wellness in general. But I have a lot of people who struggle with consistency. And I know we talked about earlier, like we both enjoy it and whether or not that's innate within us or we have this deeper understanding of what's happening within our bodies that helps create that deeper why. But how do you help people in general, like whatever age, whatever life experience, how do you help them create that consistency or get them to be a little bit more on board with this like positive behavior change, whether it's like mindsets or journal topics or just deeper thoughts that you have them reflect over to help them? Yeah,
it's a great question. If we could crack that code, let me tell you, so many times people who are watching podcasts like this, they are already committed.
Yeah.
And so I think you start thinking about how do I help people that I care about and how do I help those who aren't committed, who don't enjoy it and who struggle with it. It is tough. And oftentimes my clients are in that category. And they are smart enough people, and they have come to terms with the fact that they may never really enjoy this. And if they're going to be committed to do it, having an appointment makes a huge difference for them. And so they are fortunate that they're able to have appointments for most of their sessions to be able to at least get a couple to 3 workouts in a week that are a little more coached, a little more targeted, and then some of them are successful at doing things on their own and some of them aren't. And it's really, it's an individual difference that I wish that we could, if there was one way to make it better. A couple of things. I've been influenced by the book Atomic Habits, which I think is a powerful way to help people make small change. And we've been preaching small change for a lot of years. That book does one of the best jobs of explaining how to make that work. And I actually I developed an online module at UT that they have been kind enough to make public. And I will share that with you so that you can provide that. And I see people using it to help people bring about a small change, whether it's drinking more water, whether it's adding 30 minutes of walking in every day. That concept of starting small to build to an exponential change. There are surely exceptions to that. People who quit or start something cold turkey and they never look back. They make that change, but I think that is much smaller percentage of people. So I would say, there's a lot of good psychology work out there. The piece that I have found to be most powerful is to find ways to link the change that they're wanting to make with their identity. How do you make an identity-based change? Because if I don't believe that I'm this person, I might do it for a little bit and you might nag me into it. But if I don't believe that this is who I am, I am not going to have a long-term lasting change. And I think the example that we used in many of the classes is, if I'm a smoker and you and I are used to smoking together and I quit, when you offer me a cigarette, I can say, no thanks, I'm trying to quit. And that still means I identify as a smoker who's trying to quit. If I can think through what would it look like if I said, no thanks, I'm not a smoker, that changes the conversation. And it kind of opens the door to saying, every time I respond that way, so every time I tell you, no thanks about that extra drink or that double dessert or that staying out extra late tonight when I have a workout scheduled for the morning, if I can start to say, no thanks, I'm a committed exerciser, or no thanks, I've become physically active, and so I'm going to have to pass on that this time. Every time I do that, I strengthen that identity. And those emotional attachments, I don't know, we don't want to go there because that's a whole nother conversation. But to create some of those attachment points where I am anchored in, this is who I want to become, the more that I can do things that align with that, the better the likelihood that I'm going to make that change. So I look for ways to help my clients do that and to begin to be willing to respond in everyday circumstances about their this new person who I am, this person I want to become. And it's a becoming, it's a process. It isn't, everybody's different. One of my clients, when we first started talking about nutritional changes, and my big thing is just keep eating what you're eating.
Yeah.
It's like, what? I get to eat what I'm eating? You do. That's pretty easy, huh? Just eat less of it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how you could eat less of it. And I mean, we still laugh about this where, he cut back from 3 drinks at the Mexican food restaurant to 2 drinks. And they only had 5 baskets of chips instead of 7 baskets of chips. I mean, it's all relative.
Small changes, though.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so it was a change. And it wasn't, I'm probably exaggerating this is an older story, but we still laugh about it because it's simply becoming aware that any change I make in the direction of that identity is going to be positive, and it's going to help create that attachment to my belief that I can become that person. Yeah.
I just read Atomic Habits actually recently.
Okay.
It's fresh in my mind, and I had rebelled against the book for a while actually. Yeah. Because I was like, everyone talks about it. How good can it actually be?
How good can it be?
Yes. But my resolution goal this year is to read all of the what I call boring business books or boring self-help books that people have recommended that I'm just rebelling against. Atomic Habits was fantastic. I hate to say it, but I was so wrong, and it really was that identity change where it was like, oh my gosh, I've never thought of it like this, where I am this person that does this, or I am a person that, just makes that exercises. I am an exerciser and reinforcing that, or I am a person that shows up for myself. And it's funny that you mentioned that. I feel like you could talk about this for a long time because even just hearing you speak on this right now, it's motivating me, right? It's like, I hope people can go back and replay this because it is, if y'all want more of what she's talking about, Atomic Habits is great. And it really does dive into this and in even more ways. And when I read the title Atomic Habits, I think of atomic, like massive, yes, but he's talking literally atoms, atom size, where it's these super small, minuscule changes. And so I love that. Just, that really stuck out to me as part of the book too. And I'll leave that link and then your link in the resource below too.
What we created was right around COVID time. And people were really struggling with, as you know, all kinds of different mental health issues, physical, how
life switches.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely missed a huge public health opportunity during that season to get people outside, breathing fresh air.
Social.
And well, but you could have been,
know.
now we know that you could have been outside and being physically active, and instead the parks got shut down, and it broke my heart because I'm thinking, what an opportunity to get people, instead of binge watching, get some binge walking outside, and let's use this time positively. But enough of that. But we created this because our students were so struggling, and these are students who are kinesiology and health education majors. So we felt the need. Thankfully, I worked through the provost teaching fellows and created this module that laid out. It pulled heavily from Atomic Habits and a few other resources to share some of this information in bite-sized pieces, little pieces of information, and then provided some framework for pick one change. Yeah. And I offered extra credit in my classes for several semesters to encourage people to be able to embrace change. What's one thing that you want to change that is different than, pre-COVID, that you aren't as happy about right now? Whether it is movement, whether it's sleep, whether it's, social media, any of that is fair game. And I know we've focused on the physical, but I really think that all change happens this way. Yeah. So I'm happy to share that link with you.
I like thinking of this podcast as education, but then also inspiring action. And it sounds like that resource is a way to okay, if you're wondering how to do it, a little go along with it, ride along, and that's how it's going to happen. So from a broad perspective, what are some maybe 2 or 3 top things that you think from a population level would help inspire the next generation to be that much more invested in their own health and wellness from either an earlier age or just from a lifespan perspective?
Again, we need to crack some codes here. I know. It's challenging when you look at what has happened. We always talk about, for those of us who were in this field for a long time, and Americans have become fatter and less fit. We didn't used to have a health and fitness industry in this country. It was just, sport and physical activity, and it wasn't this whole industry that we have now. So you kind of have to wonder, if that isn't working, what might actually work? And I do think that, like most things, I think it has to start small. You're talking about local change, family unit level change, and having movement and physical activity be part of our everyday lives. And I think that's the downside to that concept that you mentioned earlier about workout. How many families do you see out walking in the neighborhoods? And I totally understand. There are places where it's not safe to walk. There isn't always equity when it comes to being able to be physically active. But with the access to computers, phones, anybody can get this information now. I think the challenge is not the what to do, it's doing it. And
the action.
And it's how do we, Nike was certainly onto something. Just do it. It really comes down to being willing to start doing something that is different than what you're used to. And it's hard. Change is hard. That's kind of the emphasis of that module that we created. It is not easy to bring about change because it requires an identity shift. It requires things to be different. And most of us don't like change very much. So I think until we're able to shift at a population level towards an embracing of the value of health and wellness. And that's where I think you get away from workout and exercise and,
as separate entities.
I would love to see integrated into the public school system from the time people are little. How do we teach movement patterns that are lifetime movements? How many people did you hear in our class say, why didn't I learn this in elementary school?
Yeah.
Why weren't we doing these movement patterns? Why didn't I learn about how to sit and the importance of how to engage my deep core? Why didn't I learn that way back when? So I think until we shift towards more thinking, what are those big pillars? What are those primal movement patterns? And what are the self-protective movement patterns, like seated postures? Sit less, move more.
Yeah.
Don't keep kids in chairs all day long. You've got to teach them how to move. You got to get them activating the deep core, the posterior chain.
Yeah.
Until some of that happens, I mean, you're coaching kids into inertia and immobility. And until we start young, I don't think anything's going to happen at the population level.
And I like thinking of the local level too, and the family unit, like thinking of Kelsey and her daughter, right? Where it's like, I hope to be that type of parent and aunt that it's like, I want my nieces and nephews to be like, look at me do this hard thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, look at you. And it's movement related and, you know, just anything, you know, I just care about the movement side of things and the health and wellness side of things. But seeing, having it start there and having it be a celebration of like, look what your body can do, you know, and starting it at that level and then growing it from there.
Can you imagine for Kelsey's, Layla's her name.
Yes.
So cute. Anyhow, can you imagine? So she's learning physically, I can do hard things, and everybody should say that probably at least once a day. We need to remind ourselves we can do hard things because we all have hard things every day.
Yes.
Whether it's an emotional hard thing or a physical hard thing. Life
we
is
do hard things every day. Yeah.
Exactly. And we need to just say it out loud. I think we need to embrace that. But I'm thinking for her that when she's in class, as she starts school and she bumps up against, for me, it would have been math. If my response is, when I can't do it, my immediate response is, I can do hard things, I'm not going to give up.
Yeah.
Like I did. I used to tell my students from 310 who were struggling with some of the basic math that they needed to be able to do, and I could always relate. And I would always tell them, when you think about this, instead of saying, I'm really bad at squats or I'm really bad at math, I need to shift that and say, I need to work harder.
I'm someone who works hard at this.
I need to work harder than everybody else. So I still remember the first statistics class that I took, getting my PhD. And I'm looking around this class at people, and they're all, I am way in over my head. Let's just say that. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And I came home and I told Phil, I am so bad at math. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I kept saying it. And all of a sudden I heard myself the next day telling a 310 student, you need to say that I just need to work harder at math. And I realized, we are so unable to see in our own selves. We need people willing to speak truth with love to us, say it kindly.
Yes.
But I needed to hear myself say that to realize that, okay, I'm not bad at math. I need to work harder at math, and I will work hard at things.
I'm someone who works hard.
I work hard, and I can master this. I will just share with you and your viewers that I got A's in all my statistics classes, and the person who was in charge of my committee, she just said, I'm not sure I've ever seen anybody really grasp for the first time some of these concepts. And I was like, I can work hard.
I'm someone who grasps concepts.
No, I said, I'm willing to work hard at this, and it doesn't come naturally for me. So I think that translates across the board. And until we can instill that from a young age, I'm not sure how much shift we're going to have. Right. So I think we should all be encouraged that personally it starts with us. We have to be willing to do hard things and to work harder than someone else, because we've all known that person, that everything comes easy, whether it's math or whether it's movement.
Yes.
They're
or
just,
both.
Yeah,
my husband.
Yeah, okay, they're just good at it. They don't have to work hard at it. Yeah, and that's okay. There are some people, but there's things that they have to work hard at too. And recognizing that, we have to encourage one another. That's hard.
Oh, yeah.
But you can do hard things. And maybe if we start with us, we can bring some change about.
And reminding each other too.
Yes,
I think that's a good
what
part
I mean.
too, is like, being that person to, if you do feel like, I mean, we all know I get stuck in that mindset,
Yep.
but hearing her say it, I'm like, what am I already, it makes me think twice about it. So even being that person for someone else and like building that person up, being like, you are someone. And I think about it too, like my little nieces and nephews and, eventual kiddos or whatever. It's like, but even your friends.
Yeah.
even
Everybody
your friends,
needs to hear that you believe in them.
Yeah.
And there are some people who are just going to roll their eyes and they're going to say, you don't know my story, you don't know my history. And that's when you love them well, but you communicate that you do believe in them and you do believe that they can do hard things. And I think that's where, with my clients, I can I've worked with them, some of them, for so long, because life is hard in different ways over time. And so we need to be able to help other people embrace, it's hard, but I can do this and I can learn and I can grow. And whether that's physical, mental, emotional, whatever it is, we can help each other.
And I guarantee those people that are thinking that, they go back later and they're like, oh, wait, okay. They think twice about, she told me I can do it. I did roll my eyes at her, but I can't,
Oh, there's a lot of eye rolling that goes on.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I guarantee they think about it later where they're like, oh, she said that. Okay, well, maybe I don't believe it, but something to think about, and it's weaseling the way into.
And that's where small change really does matter. So when I want an older client to be able to do some jump training, and we start with a line on the floor and they just step over and back and then add a little hop. And, you have to make it small so that people can do hard things. And I think we have to honor that those things are hard.
Right.
And they may not be hard for us, or, you may find it easy, like math comes real easy to some people. It's not easy for me. And so we have to honor that for some people it's really hard and that's okay, but we believe in them.
Definitely. I love that. I think that's a great place to end too, because I'm going to have to go back and listen to the last few minutes over and over again, because it's like a little motivational pep talk and it will be in my pocket. So that's perfect. Well, Dr. Dixie Stanforth, thank you for coming on Wellness Fixes the Pod. It is a pleasure to know you live close enough to you that we can do this in person and chat and catch up and just like reminisce on my time at UT, your time at UT, our time together at UT, but then also just like our passion and purpose in this like health and wellness industry. So thank you. I'm grateful for you. And yes, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. And I am so grateful for you as well.
Yes. Well, thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, got a ton out of it. Again, it's going to be one that I go back and save, because I do think the repetition of some of the things, that's why we'll do this. We do like a little book club or podcast episode after the expert interviews where we repeat some of the information and go over it and some of the top points and really just like repetitively like drill down some of these concepts. So this will be definitely one that I save and listen to over and over again. So I hope you guys got just as much out of it, and I'll see you guys again on the next episode of Wellness Fixes the Pod.